Ian, that was fantastic. So for our next session, there are a million different types of games. So many different types of varieties of games. And some regions have more diverse games than others. But there's no question that no region showcases a wider, more diverse range of games than Asia. Everything is on the table, by genre, from RPG to open worlds, to desktop, to mobile, to platform, to Web3. Every kind of game is embraced. So what can we learn from this? What are the key takeaways? Here to unpack all that and discuss is returning moderator, Leah Cowan-Butler, LCB, as well as Evan Oyang, Kathleen Osgood, and Ryan Yo. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, thanks for being here, everybody. Now, you've probably noticed that Web3 gaming has been very harshly criticized in the West for being too financialized, but it's also been embraced in the East for pretty much the same reasons. And talk to any Web3 game developer and they'll tell you that this isn't new. We've seen it with other models previously, things like free-to-play. Originally it was rejected in the West, embraced in the East, and now it accounts for a very, very large part of the gaming industry. So today in this talk, we're going to have a chat about how the way that Asia's openness to different types of business models, different genres, different technologies, has actually made it a leader in Web3 gaming today. So before we get to the whole point of Web3 gaming and the state of it today, Ryan, I know you've got a good grasp on the landscape in terms of the history of Web2 gaming in Asia. Do you want to kick us off by just giving us a little bit of I guess, a backstory on that?
Sure. So I think because as in Galaxy Interactive, right, we invest in both Web2 and Web3 games.
Yep.
So we study the history of gaming industry, spend a lot of time on that. And I think the big part of the whole gaming industry, if you observe last 2 decades, right, all the creative, the newest creative technology coming from the West, but the business model innovation, right, in the gaming almost always come from the East, right, Asia,
yep.
and which include free-to-play. I'm just gonna quote one numbers. Probably a lot of people know Asia is a big market, but just look at the whole free-to-play Web2 market. The Asia developers and publishers, right, Japan, Korea, and China, these 3 countries combined accounts for more than 50% of a global free-to-play game market.
Wow.
And if we talk about the actual core games that maybe the Web3 audience are more interested with the economy, right, with more actions, the 3 countries combined in Web2 account for 80% plus of the global market size.
Wow.
So that should give you a sense about, Asian developers are not just because they are good, not because the market is good, but be big, but also they just the capability and the ability to innovate is there.
Yeah, and I think just another thing to add to that, I guess, is that when people look at Asia, they kind of think of this as some homogenous region of just like, I'm going to have a go-to-market strategy for Asia. But actually, it's kind of this melting pot of different cultures, languages, regulatory climates. Maybe you could talk us a little bit through, the differences across Asia and what we're actually talking about here in terms of the different countries.
Yeah. I can start, and I think other guests will have more input here. I think Asia is very complicated, and all of us agree. Especially, I think China, Japan, and Korea are on the Web2 space are the 2 biggest market, but they also are very big in Web3 in terms of also developer and player base. But Southeast Asia is a totally different space, and I'm sure Kathleen have a better understanding about that market. But basically, you have to think about the culture and the region and the capability, and a lot of things matters. And so when people think about launching gaming in Asia, usually they're thinking about each country, right? In Southeast Asia, it's more complicated, but at least in East Asia, the China strategy is very different than Korea, very different than Japan, but they're all huge market.
Yeah. Evan, maybe you could talk us a little bit through the regulation. This is jumping ahead to the Web3 bit now, but it's very much a patchwork quilt of different regulatory approaches. So how's that looking at the moment?
Yeah, well, I can also talk a little bit about the differences that we see. By the way, can people hear me? I can barely hear you guys. But anyway, one of the things that is interesting about just the gaming market is that it's a 200 billion total market, right? Just Web2 gaming. Asia is actually half of it, right? So that's actually huge in terms of numbers, right? But the domiciles are actually very different. If you look at Hong Kong, it's a financial hub. So it's not necessarily saying that that's like the cultural center of Asia necessarily. And of course there's films, music, all that stuff, but in relation to Japan and Korea, it's not quite as cultural.
Yep.
But China is huge, right? China has like has 70% of the Asian market basically, but population is actually huge as well. But I'm going to make sort of like a little bit of a stereotype of it, of what Asia is, right? You got Korea. There's absolutely huge on crypto because of the way that Koreans are very investment opportunities oriented. If you get your token listed in Korea, that's like the golden goose, right? And then it gotten so speculative and so hot in that market. The regulator is very much on that market, looking at it, right? But looking at just one exchange, right? Not to be named, but you guys all know what it is. It's like just get listed there, and that's sort of what you need to do, right? And you get Southeast Asia, which is extremely different as well. You get the Philippines, which has tons of players, right? Sky Mavis have lots of players there. And you got like, the rest of it. Thailand is very speculative as well. Vietnam is very entrepreneurial. But you look at Singapore and Hong Kong, very financial focused. If you look at Hong Kong, it's not about the culture aspect of it as much as it's about we really want to be in this new sort of like globalized infrastructure that we see in financially. We want to be ahead of it because the Chinese assets, needs to come out given geopolitics. We need to get that out. Those assets need to be tokenized and get into the global system rather than through the US dollar. The geopolitical aspect of that is actually huge, right? And you got Singapore that's caught in the middle. Don't want to make it like kind of like, oh, global north, global south. I don't want to make a choice here. I want to play both. But that makes the entire geopolitically, very, very interesting, right? Players, the consumers, and Korea, Japan are more lined up with the U.S. in the West. China, Hong Kong, and then you got a little bit of Philippines in the middle, and then you got Singapore right in the middle as well. So it's kind of interesting geopolitically where we are.
It is such a helpful overview in terms of the different national profiles. And you did talk about the players, the consumers themselves, also mentioned the Philippines where I'm based. Let's dive deeper into that because, Kathleen, I think you have a really fantastic view into this in terms of what adoption looks like. I'd be particularly interested in, what are you seeing in the differences between the motivations of players in the West versus players in the East when they're coming to games that are built on the Ronin blockchain, for example?
Motivations, particularly in Southeast Asia, I can speak to Southeast Asia because Axie Infinity, the game developed by Sky Mavis, did very well there. Axie is actually the fastest growing game in history, not just in Web3, but in history.
That's amazing.
And I believe that happened because Sky Mavis, the company that made Axie, really understands the motivations of why players engage in that region. I believe those motivations to be achievement and community. And these manifest intrinsically. So can we create a game where people feel a sense of belonging by owning their assets and love the IP and feel this deep sense of community, and also extrinsically? So can we help these players make money? Sometimes that's taboo to talk about, but that is what is happening, especially in Southeast Asia. Now, enabling players to make money, or players making money, monetizing their time in games is not the first time this has happened. In Web3 is not the first time this has happened. You see this happening in Southeast Asia by farming digital gold. And players have found creative ways to monetize for a long time now. And the economic conditions in Southeast Asia have made this monetization something that is actually lucrative and is seen as a supplementary income to these players. So when Axie came along, it was something that rhymed. It wasn't completely different. I think it was very familiar to these players engaging in these player-owned economies, and it almost offered them a safer way of doing so. Now, when I usually talk to games that want to come on Ronin, I'm always asking them, do you have a grinding element to your game? It is so important to understand that if you enable players to abstract from your game, you will get back tenfold in return. There's this word reciprocity that I think applies very well to Web3. The more you enable, the more you let people own, the more they'll give back. And we've seen this in hordes throughout Southeast Asia. These players then feel this unique sense of a relationship with their assets, and they create content, they tell their friends about it. They now want these assets to do well. An example of this absolutely taking off is Pixels. So Pixels is the #1 game in Web3 right now. It just so happens to be on Ronin. When they were on Polygon, they had around 3,000 users. We worked deeply with them. They were able to leverage Ronin's infrastructure that we've created to scale millions of users, our advisory, and then our deep machine of UA, and being able to tap into this massive player base that we've amassed, as well as just the machine we have in making noise. And what happened? They skyrocketed to 1 million users within a couple of months, or 1 million daily active users in a couple of months. Where were a lot of these users? They were in Southeast Asia. So Pixels really understood those motivations. They had a way for people to grind the game. They had a leader that deeply understands community and how to activate and excite players. And they were able to be very successful in that region. So we will continue to look for teams to build on Ronin that understand those motivations. You have to meet players where they're at. That includes developing on devices that are popular in emerging markets, and also understanding exactly why these players are there.
Yeah, this is actually echoing the last question, because I think it's very important to understand the regional difference, the culture difference, the motivation, right? Like just by this part, in general, I'm telling a lot of Western investors or devs, right? I think a big difference of Asia in general, right, is I think the associating money with games is not that taboo. It's not taboo, right?
Yeah.
I think each country have a very different, style, right?
Why do you think that is?
I think we joke about this, I think in general, we feel like in the West society, I think money is associated with a lot of like taboo and dirty and evil. People don't want to direct talk about it, right? But for example, in China, in Lunar New Year, people give each other red envelope, and to the kids, right? It's impossible for a lot of people in America to give money, direct money to the kids on holidays, right? Even from strangers. I think just show the cultural difference, like people understanding and the feeling about money is different. Doesn't mean that you can throw money in their face, right? Like in Japan, you cannot do that, right? For example, but also the association money in general is not a big issue. Like Japan, the gacha game, they invented gacha, right? And they don't feel that there's any issue with that, right? And the people are willing to spend thousands of dollars in gacha games. So I think in the end, you have to work with the local people to understand their market really well, like Scam did in Southeast Asia. But also, I think as an investor, when you work with a team, I think Evan mentioned that Hong Kong, Singapore, it's very important. Like, a lot of companies, they are from Singapore and Hong Kong, but actually there's no dev actually in Singapore and Hong Kong. It's very important to know which country they're actually from. And actually that dictates a lot of their style too. Like I actually don't think there is a team is truly cross-region, right? I mean, I'm sure when you're big enough, you have people from a different source, but the founder team, are they from China, Korea, Japan, or Vietnam? They actually dictate a lot of the style and how they do things. And I think that's quite very important when you look at Asia in general.
I'm wondering if you've got thoughts on that too.
The ownership paradigm is huge, right? I mean, there's certain ethic about. Let's start with schooling, right? Most of the schools in Asia are all about rote memorization. It's very different from the Western way of bringing up. Most local schools are about rote learning. So what is it about? It's really about hard work and about getting results from that hard work. Therefore, this work hard and own your asset paradigm is very much in that DNA, right? So that's really interesting from a perspective of so Animoca Brands obviously came from a gaming background, right? We now diversified more into infrastructure, education and stuff like that. But we believe ultimately Web3 would be onboarded by gamers, right? That's why we're early supporters of Sky Mavis, right? Axie, we're proud, Paxos is a proud portfolio company, very happy about that. But when we actually try to onboard users, we found that it's a lot easier to sell that in the Asia region. And that's why we would advocate that if you're a gaming company, you have to look at Asia as the core market, right? Yeah. As both consumers and investors understand why the onboarding process is so easy, right? And so much easier, not so much, it's not easy in that way, right? And also the paradigm about, farmers or users who are getting paid to play games, why is that something that feels so strange, but it really isn't. It's just that people may not realize that in a normal free-to-play game that we play on mobile every single day, 97% of the people don't pay anything on that, right? But is that 97%, are only 3% of people worthwhile for the company? No. The 97% are actually very important players that contribute to the greater ecosystem, right? Yeah. Web3, by that ownership paradigm, only allows that distribution of wealth to be more fairly distributed, right? Yeah. Yes, you obviously for a system to sustain, obviously you have to put in investment, your time, and get a fund out of it, right? Web 2, Web 3 is the same, but in Web 3, what happens is that you are contributing your time, and time is money, right? Ultimately, and you should be contributing, and if you contribute more time to it, you should be getting more reward from it, from either through mining tokens or reputation or both, right? This is what ultimately this is about, right? That's why we're very, very bullish about what Sky Mavis is doing. It's a little bit different of a philosophy in terms of how you guys want to run Ronin and stuff. But at the end of the day, if you look at the success, right, that is the users and the number of games that are trying to get on Ronin. It's a testament of why focus is important as well. It's a different philosophy. Our philosophy obviously is openness, but Ronin is a slightly different approach. It's more permission-based with gradually opening. But it's really interesting, the success that that particular path took as well.
Yeah, I would say also, I just add to that, in free-to-play, right, I think that's a very good point. The time is an investment, but also who are the product in free-to-play game? It's actually the people who play for free. Because without a free player, the whale don't have incentive, motivation to pay, right? So that economy is there. Yeah. And when we talk about the West Asia difference, I totally agree that Asia is going to be the first adoption, first wave adoption, and just as in free-to-play games. But just look at the US right now, or US Europe. Free-to-game it's already a bigger market than traditional premium games, right? Even in the West. And the majority of them are actually pay-to-win, gacha games. I think there's a huge cultural difference among different countries, different regions. But in the end, human beings, their motivation are very similar. I think it's the Asian publisher, developer actually figure out how to apply the free-to-play and those motivation to the Western market in Web 2 space already. Yeah. It's happening right now. And so I think we just need to see who can figure out how to do that also to the Western player in the Web 3 space, just like how that already adopted in the Asia, right? So it's unknown, I would say right now, but there's a lot of model that could work. Yeah. We are very looking forward to see it actually succeed.
Well, just on that business model innovation piece, I'm interested to know more about how you're seeing that manifest in Web3 gaming now. But not just on the software side or even, say the monetization side, but also through devices. Like, how are you seeing the demands from the East actually impact how these games are being designed and built and distributed?
I think the future, at least right now, is mobile, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
absolutely. Already mobile.
Yeah.
And
in Asia, definitely.
In Asia, but even in the West, we talk about the mobile game market in the West is already bigger than the PC console as well, right? So I think that's no question. I think there's a regulation and a policy about Apple Store, Google Play, which kind of relevant here. But I think in general, I think there's a few different trends going on, right? There are the fully on-chain trend, which again, it's very, theoretically, it's very attractive, but also it will actually bring more complication to play. So that's technically, that could be the future, like a long term, right?
It's very
that's
early days,
the power of Web3 games. And then there's the Asian way, like there's also the fair skill gaming play, right? Playbook that you can say there's a real skill involved. So there's a loss of, the loss of asset, which will actually lead to a very good economical system. But then also the skill gaming has a very high bar. So I think a lot of Asian developers are doing is actually not trying to be super perfect in system and the theory, right? They just try to say, okay, I have a good content, I have a good enough economy system, I will get people adopt, and then I'll adjust the economy system gradually, right? I think in general, that's why I find, we found that Asian developers are more practical in Web3 space, think about business model, and a lot of Western developers are more theoretical, which could lead to the next innovation. That's what I feel today.
Kathleen, I'd love to hear from you, because you're out there speaking to game makers every day, and I think if they're looking at Ronin, they've probably got the Southeast Asian market in mind.
Yeah.
What are you hearing from them in terms of how they might be shaping their games to attract that market?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, mobile is very important. Like have a playable build on mobile, and that's because this is an emerging market, and a lot of folks, they have a cell phone over a laptop. And so again, meeting that player where they're at, and then also we now see more games that have like free-to-play elements, but very unique strategies of getting the players to have like a sense of emotion when they start playing, and also when you expose a player through like free-to-play, then you also expose them to our communities. Ronin has an extremely strong community, and all the games that we bring in have very strong communities. They all have something to bring to the table, and the community is able to create this sense of FOMO. So like me as a free-to-play player, I may then want to grind and actually own these assets so I could participate in these conversations and be part of something. And that's what I think Web3 really enables. And you touched on it earlier. I think these teams are more likely to iterate live. So they will be putting out like alpha tests and betas and working with the community and understanding feedback. I think that is more prevalent within Web3. Because you're always communicating with the community. You're launching this, but you're doing it on the premise that, hey, we're going to listen to you. You guys own these assets. We want to listen to you. We want to help further your investment. But then also these individuals are like, hell yeah, I want to give feedback because I'm a part of this and I own this and I want to help make it better. So there's this better sense of like listening to your community, I believe, that Web3 really instills.
I guess as a final question, we've only got a little bit more time left. I'd love to come back to something you mentioned, Ryan, about the developer's perspective. How different is it in Asia? I'm thinking things like whether it's raising money, hiring great talent. What is the landscape like in terms of Asia compared to, say, some of the games that you might be investing in, say, in the West?
I would say Asia has a very mature Web3 ecosystem in terms of funding, right? From the incubator, investor, listing, right? Advisory, go-to-market. So, mostly the Asian developers could already, raise the money and get listed in Asia alone, right? And then a lot of markets in Asia already, right? So, but a lot of them these days also try to get the support from the Western, institutions, right? So. We have been very, as a fund based in New York and California, right? We have been very successful in navigate that, dynamics and try to get very good deals.
Is that unusual in terms of bridging?
I would say it's from the Western side. I think it's actually, I don't see a lot of Western investors spend a lot of time in Asia. That's my view, but I'm not sure if any of you guys disagree.
In terms of developer talent and gamers and all that, well, first of all, there's a lot of talent in, shall we say, China and Vietnam. There's just a lot. And this is also an industry where it's interesting when we're just because we're based in Hong Kong, we're headquartered out of Hong Kong. It's a very small city, right? It's 7 million people. And we can't find the talent there necessarily, right? There's not enough talent there. So when you meet teams across, they're always multinational. So the way we look at it is kind of like, well, we don't know where teams are actually, where they're actually sitting. But if you want to look at developer talent, right? Actually, Web3 talent can be found in China very easily. And some people actually don't get it mixed up. Just because China bans cryptocurrencies itself does not mean that China is not big on blockchain. China is huge on blockchain, right? They've been on this, on sort of exploring the power of blockchain for a long, long time. So it's a national priority without it being announced, right? So there's a lot of blockchain talent in China. There's obviously a lot of gaming talent in China, particularly given the regulations right now. A lot of, I guess a lot of developers are out of work or looking for other types of work, right? So that's great. From a cost perspective, Vietnam is obviously great as well. So
I would say this is a big, I think it's a big mistake if the Western investor, especially look at the gaming, that not look at Asia Web3 market, because in the Web2 space, it's actually very challenging to invest in Asia, right? Because the exit, the IPO market is very different, the regulation very different.
Yep.
I think a big reason like Web3 could work and could, is to actually bring the Asia developers and publishers to the global investors, right? Like it's very hard to invest in Japanese company as an equity investment, right? Korean is a little bit easier, but there's a lot of complexity around that. China is all totally different, right? And Southeast Asia, each country have a different reason. It's hard to invest in traditional equity, try to get exit from the IPO or even M&A. But in the Web3 space, you don't have that restriction, right? Yeah. And I would say that's a big motivation for us to look at Web3 is actually to leverage the best talent in Asia, from different countries, and create a huge market, down the road.
Sky Mavis has been an amazing case study for this. I think Vietnam has already been recognized as a developer hotspot, but I think in terms of putting Web3 gaming development on the map, really thank Sky Mavis a lot for that in terms of the region, and obviously brought on board some of the biggest investors in the world, and certainly from the West too. What do you think has been the key to that?
So we have an office in Vietnam. It's around 250 incredible developers there, but we also have our growth team and our business team spread worldwide. And Ronan's and Sky Mavis, it's a little bit different from what these guys are doing because we're investing. We're also creating this ecosystem at the same time, which is a little bit different than just pure investments. So when I'm looking at all these opportunities, we have to bring in different teams from across the world that are hitting different spots in order to create a very dynamic ecosystem that continues to grow and to flourish. It just can't be focused on like this sector in Asia because we're not going to dominate that way, and we would like to dominate. So we really have to look towards, hey, is someone over here doing something new? But are what they doing, can they also tap into what we can bring to the table? And again, do they have this grinding mechanism? Because we have a massive player base and a lot to bring to the table. So I think that is the key differentiator is like we have to look global. We, of course, have so much value and so much respect towards Asia and have a huge user base there, but we also have a huge user base in LATAM. Like a lot of these emerging markets we're looking towards. India is one I really want to tap into. We can talk all day on India. That is an emerging market that's prepped and primed for Web3 gaming, I think. And so you have to be dynamic in your thinking, especially at Ronan, in like who we are bringing on, who we're partnering with.
Yeah. Guys, unfortunately we're at time, but I just want to say thank you because this is such a difficult topic to unpack. There is so much complexity and nuance across the region, but I think you did such an amazing job in showing all those differences, but also the common threads. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.